So, tRPC. Oh boy, we have a lot to talk about. I started using tRPC a few months back, and believe me, it completely changed how I code. I used to use the native fetch and write down the API routes manually, and oh boy had I made a lot of typos. If you're not familiar with tRPC, it's basically a framework that lets you communicate between the server and the client in a type-safe way. So it was mainly targeted for TypeScript audience, but I believe it still gives TypeScript for JavaScript devs. But the documentation currently is limited to pages directory if you're using Next.js, and people using app directory had a tough way making it compatible, so I will set tRPC up from scratch in a project and hope you'll find it useful. I'll write a blog explaining everything soon, but currently I'm working on that feature on my portfolio, so join the Discord server to keep yourself updated. Let's begin. First of all, before writing any code, just install these packages. I will add this command down in the description so you can copy paste. And after installing this, install tNstack/react-query-devtools as a dev dependency. And that's all you have to do for installation. By the way, did you know 93% of you are actually not subscribed? And only 7% you is only subscribed. Currently we have 847 subscribers and 93% of you is not subscribed. How crazy is that? Just go and subscribe. Just make the red button gray, and I'm making this video. You can do this, right? Now before going forward, if you're using tRPC v10, they have a v11 beta released, but if you're using v10 because this one is actually stable, make sure you install 4.36.1 version of React Query and not v5. Okay, so I have this Next.js project set up. You can just run the create next app command and set up from here. But if you're lazy like me, you can just go to this repo and just clone it. It has tRPC already set up and working with clerk and other things, so you can just copy it. But if you have a scratch project, you can just navigate to your src directory, and inside it you're going to create a lib folder. Inside this lib folder you're going to have a tRPC folder, and inside it we're going to create these files. We have the routers folder, we have the client.ts, context.ts, index.ts, and tRPC.ts. So first of all, let's go to context.ts. Okay, inside it, first of all, we're gonna call our database and any schema that we have. For example, I'm using Postgre or MySQL, I'm not sure actually. But whatever SQL database you have with like Prisma or Drizzle, anything. So we have the database set up over here. So if the export constant db equals to Drizzle of this connection thing. So we're going to export it and we're going to import it over here along with all the schemas that we have. For now, we only have the post schema, but you can have other schemas over here. For example, users, blogs, anything you want. So we're just going to import it. We're going to export a constant with create context inner. So you're going to use the arrow function, and inside it, we're going to return an object. Now this object will contain the db and the posts that we imported. After that, we're going to export another constant with create context. Now this one also going to be an arrow function. So after initiating the arrow function, inside it, we're going to return the create context inner. Now lastly, we're going to export the type of this context because we'll be using it later. We're going to use infer async return type that comes from at tRPC/server. And inside it, we're going to pass the generic of type of create context inner. Next up, we're going to go to tRPC.ts file. Inside it, we're first going to write export constant t equals to, we're going to import init tRPC from at tRPC/server, and we're just going to write it. Now this one gives us a method of context, and this context takes a generic. So inside this, we're actually going to pass the context that we exported from context.ts. So we just pass the context as a generic, and after that we're going to use the method .create. This .create takes an object, so you're going to open it, and inside it we're first going to write the transformer. Now this transformer will take the superjson that we initially installed, and we're just going to pass it over here. Now after this, we're going to have another property of error formatter. Now this one is a function, and this function takes two parameters. So we have the shape and error. Now we're going to import Zod error because we'll be formatting based on Zod. So inside the function, we're just going to return an object. First of all, we're going to spread the shape, and after that, we're going to return the data. Inside this data, it's an object. So you're going to just write spreaded shape.data, and after that, Zod error. We're going to check whether the error that caused is an instance of Zod error or not. And if it is, we're just going to flatten the error. And if not, we're just going to return null. Lastly, we're just going to export the router with export constant create tRPC router with t that we initially made, and we have this property router. So export constant create tRPC router equals to t.router. Now we also have to export a procedure. We're going to write export constant public procedure equals to t.procedure, and that's it. If you have a middleware, or for example, you're using authentication, you can just go to the template repository that I showed previously, and you can clone that repo. I have already set up clerk for that one. Now that we have everything we need to make a route, we're just going to go inside the routers, and we're going to create a file called post.ts. Now inside this post.ts, first of all, we're going to import the create tRPC router from the tRPC.ts file, and now we're going to export the export constant post router. Now this will be equal to create tRPC router, that is the function that we imported, and inside it, it takes an object. So inside this object, we can create as many routes as we want. We have this route get infinite posts. You can have another route, for example, create posts or maybe delete post. Now we have to define how to approach this route. For example, using any middleware or normally. Normally means public procedures that we previously defined. And if you have any middleware, for example, authentication, you're going to use a private procedure or some meaningful procedures. We're first going to import the public procedure. Now this public procedure takes a .input. Now how this input and query works, I have previously explained in my Drizzle pagination video, and you might want to check that out because I explained each and every step in that video. Now we're going to go to our index.ts. Inside it, we're first going to write export constant app router, which will be our main router that will be routing all the API routes, for example, users, blogs, posts, or maybe comments, messages, chats, everything. And first of all, we're going to import create tRPC router from tRPC.ts. Now we're just going to write it, create tRPC router with the function, and inside it, it obviously takes an object. We made the post.ts route, or if you have a user.ts file with user routes, for example, create user, delete user, or something else like that, you're going to have users. Now we're going to import the post router, export it from post.ts, and we're just going to link it over here. Lastly, we're going to export the type of this router. So export type app router equals to type of app router. Now the last file, we have the client.ts. Now inside it, we're going to export a variable that we'll use on the client side to fetch all the routes, so the export constant tRPC. And now we're going to import the create tRPC react destructured from tRPC/react-query. Now we can just write create tRPC react, and this create tRPC react takes a generic, so we can just import the app router that we exported from index.ts, and we're just going to pass it as a generic to create tRPC react. Now we still have two files to go. One, we have to actually route it using the Next.js API routes. And last, we have to wrap the whole layout or the whole HTML page or the body basically using a tRPC provider. Now inside your app directory, you might want to create an API route. And inside it, we're going to have a tRPC folder. Inside it, we're going to have a dynamic tRPC folder. So inside the square brackets, we have the tRPC. Inside the dynamic tRPC folder, we have the route.ts. Now inside this route.ts, we're first going to write constant handler equals to arrow function, and as the parameter in this function, we're going to pass the request as next request. Now first of all, we're going to import the fetch request handler from @tRPC/server/adapters/fetch, and now we're just going to write return fetch handler. It's a function. So inside this function, it takes an object. First of all, we're going to pass the rec. Next, we have the endpoint. We're going to map it to /API/tRPC. Next, we have the router. We're going to fill it up using the app router that we actually exported from lib/tRPC. We have the create context that we're going to import from tRPC/context.ts and just pass it over here. Now, if we get any error for any reason, we're going to handle it over here using the onError function. First of all, we're going to check if the node env is development or not. If it is, we're going to fire a callback using path and error as parameter, and we're just going to log tRPC failed on path or no path with error message. Lastly, if the environment is not development, we're just going to return undefined. Now I have to export the handler as get and post. Now finally, we're going to create a provider. I like to separate my providers. Inside the components folder, I have a providers folder, and inside it I have the client.tsx. Now this one is nothing fancy, but you gotta make sure that you mark it as use client. So it's gonna run on the client side. First of all, we're going to create a function to get the base URL. So as this function runs on the client side, we have to check whether the window is defined or not. If not, we're just going to return an empty string. Then first of all, we're going to check whether Vercel URL is defined or not. Vercel URL will only be defined if you are in production and you are hosting via Vercel. And if it is not, then we're going to use the localhost as our base URL and the hosted port. So by default, it will be 3000. We're going to use the useState hook, and we're just going to write inside the array query client equals to useState with a callback of new query client. And then we have another useState inside the array tRPC client with useState of the callback tRPC.createClient. So this tRPC actually coming from the tRPC/client that we exported from the client.ts file. And inside it, first of all, we're going to pass the transformer as superjson. And then we have the links and array. Inside it, first of all, we have the HTTP batch link. This takes the API tRPC route. So we have the base URL /API/tRPC. Lastly, we have the logger link. Now this will only be enabled when we are on development mode. So if we are on development mode and we actually have an error, then only it will be enabled. Now that we have everything we need, first of all, we're going to write tRPC.provider. This tRPC actually comes from the same one, the client.ts. And then we have the client as tRPC client that we have with this useState hook, and the query client with the query client that comes from this useState hook. Now I have other providers, for example, NextJS tRPC query client provider with the original React query. and the theme provider, but you do not need all of them. You just need the tRPC provider. Now that the component is ready, you're gonna just go to layout.tsx inside your app directory, and you're just gonna wrap your children or the body using the client provider component. Now this is the way I like to use it everywhere. For example, Post-it uses the same structure. Drizzle pagination video that use the same structure. You can just get the template from here. You can just clone it. You can start it if you want. And I guess that sums it up. I hope you liked this video. I hope it was helpful. Have a good day. Peace.